Welcome to Study Watch. Consumer behavior, the hows and the whys of why we buy things.
Yeah.
And we've got, some really interesting textbook excerpts all about marketing and consumer behavior. This stuff is fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. It's funny, most of us just go through our day not realizing all the different factors that impact, our purchasing decisions.
We really are on autopilot.
Totally.
So let's break down this autopilot. Like, what is consumer behavior and why should marketers care so much about it?
Essentially, consumer behavior is the study of how people make decisions about buying and using products and services. And marketers, they're kind of obsessed with it because if they can, decode your motivations, your needs, your desires, they can create strategies that resonate with you and ultimately, get you to open your wallet.
So it's like a giant puzzle.
Exactly.
They're trying to solve, but the puzzle pieces are our brains.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the key tools that they use is something called the consumer decision model. It's like a roadmap of the steps we all go through before we actually make a purchase, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk us through those steps.
All right, so first there's recognizing a need. You realize you're out of coffee, your laptop is dying, or you just have to have those new headphones. Then comes the information search. So you're browsing online reviews, comparing prices, maybe even texting a friend for recommendations.
Oh, the endless scrolling through reviews, yeah.
Exactly. And then after the information overload, well, you start to evaluate your options. You're weighing the pros and cons. Finally, you make the purchase. But it doesn't end there, right? There's this crucial step afterwards, post-purchase behavior. It's that feeling of, am I happy with this decision? Was it worth it? And it can really influence whether you ever buy from that brand again.
Okay, so this is making me rethink that impulse purchase I made last week.
Oh, yeah.
So if I'm thrilled with something, I'm more likely to recommend it to people.
Right.
But this isn't just a logical process, right? Emotions play into this whole thing as well.
Absolutely. In fact, emotions often play a bigger role than we realize. Think about those limited time offer sales. They create a sense of urgency. They kind of push you to buy before you've even really thought it through.
It's true. Okay, so emotions are pulling the strings. But what about other influences? Do things like where we live or the people we hang out with affect our buying choices too?
Without a doubt, culture, social groups, individual personalities, all of it mixes together to influence our buying decisions. It's like a really complex recipe with a lot of ingredients.
This is making me realize how much I've probably been influenced without even knowing it.
Yeah.
Speaking of influence, our sources mention this thing called customer loyalty.
Yeah.
Why is that so important for businesses?
So it's more than just, getting repeat customers. Loyal customers are more profitable in the long run because it actually costs less to keep a happy customer than to try and constantly attract new ones. Plus, loyal customers, they're less sensitive to price changes. They're more willing to stick with a brand, even if cheaper options pop up.
So a happy customer is a valuable customer. But how do companies actually measure that value? Is there a way to calculate how much a loyal customer is worth?
Well, there is. It's called customer lifetime value, or CLV. Basically, it takes into account the initial cost of acquiring a customer, the ongoing revenue they generate from all those repeat purchases, and even the cost of, keeping them happy with things like loyalty programs and great customer service. So essentially, it's telling companies how much a single customer is worth to them over their entire relationship with the brand.
Wow. So those buy 10, get one free punch cards are not just about being generous, they're about building that CLV.
Exactly. And speaking of what we buy, it's easy to think, it's all about the product itself, but our sources suggest it's a lot more layered than that.
Yeah, that's where that total product concept comes in, right?
Right.
And it really blew my mind to realize, it's not just the item itself, it's everything around it, the brand, the packaging, even the customer service after you've made the purchase.
All of those elements contribute to the overall value that you perceive in a product. So it's like they're building a whole experience around it, not just offering a thing.
Yeah, like a story that you buy into. Speaking of stories, the source mentioned different types of value, like utilitarian and hedonic. What's the difference between those two?
So utilitarian value, that's all about practicality and function. How well does a product solve a problem or fulfill a need? So think of a good winter coat. Its utilitarian value is keeping you warm and dry. Hedonic value, on the other hand, is about the emotional experience, the pleasure, the enjoyment you get from a product.
So a designer handbag might have high hedonic value but low utilitarian value.
Exactly. It's not necessarily practical, but it makes you feel good.
Yeah. It's about that emotional reward.
Yep.
What about you? Do you tend to lean more towards like practical purchases or ones that make you feel good?
That's a tough one. I think it really depends on what I'm buying and my mood that day.
That's fair. It's just fascinating to realize how companies tap into both types of value to appeal to all these different consumers. It's like they're reading our minds to figure out what will make us buy. And that leads us to the next big topic, perception. It's not just about, seeing an ad. It's how our brains process the information that we're just bombarded with every single day.
Right.
This is where the marketing magic really comes in, doesn't it?
It does.
We're just surrounded by ads, social media posts, billboards. How do our brains even begin to make sense of it all?
Well, according to our sources, perception starts with exposure. Simply being exposed to a stimulus, like an ad or a product on the shelf. But exposure alone isn't enough. For a message to really sink in, it needs to grab your attention.
So even if I see 100 ads while I'm scrolling, only a few will actually make me stop and pay attention.
Exactly. Our attention is selective. It's often driven by our existing beliefs, our needs, what we want. Then, once something's caught our attention, we move to interpretation. So we start assigning meaning to what we've seen or heard.
This is where things get really subjective, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you know what I find funny in an ad? Someone else might find totally off-putting.
Exactly. Our interpretations are colored by our own personal experiences, our cultural backgrounds, even our mood at that moment. And finally, we have our response. So how we react based on our perception. And this could range from immediately buying a product to just remembering a brand name for later.
Okay, so if our perception is so selective and unique, how do marketers even stand a chance of getting our attention?
That is the challenge, right? And they're constantly coming up with creative strategies to break through the noise. So, think about catchy jingles, celebrity endorsements, or even just those ads that make you laugh.
Right. It's all about creating a message that resonates.
Yeah.
And it cuts through the clutter.
It's a little bit sneaky, but I have to admit it's fascinating.
It is.
How much effort goes into trying to influence our choices? Speaking of effort, our sources also delved into learning and memory. The processes that explain why some ads get stuck in your head while others just vanish instantly.
Yeah.
I definitely have a few jingles from my childhood that still pop into my head every now and then, even though I haven't heard them in years.
Oh, I know, me too. And that's the power of learning and memory at work, right? And guess what? Marketers have figured out how to tap into those processes to make their messages stick.
All right, give me the inside scoop. What kind of mind tricks are they using?
Well, our sources outline two main types of learning: behavioral learning and cognitive learning.
Mm-hmm.
Behavioral learning is all about association, pairing things with certain feelings or behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So the classic example is Pavlov's dog. He learned to associate the sound of a meal with getting food.
I remember learning about that in school. Yeah. So how does this dog and bell situation translate to, advertising?
Yeah.
Well, think about beer commercials that show beautiful people having fun at a party.
Right.
They're trying to associate their product with, good times and happy memories. Even if those things have nothing to do with the actual beer, this is called classical conditioning.
So they're making you feel good about a product without even realizing why. It's so sneaky.
It is. But what about cognitive learning? How is that different?
Yeah.
So cognitive learning is more about actively thinking, processing information, and making conscious decisions. So it's less about, subconscious associations and more about understanding why a product or service might be beneficial to you.
So when you actually read those product reviews, compare prices and think about whether you really need that new gadget.
Exactly. And marketers, they can influence this process by, providing clear information, highlighting features, benefits, addressing concerns. But they can also use some subtle tactics that play on our cognitive biases.
Ooh, tell me more about these mind games. What kind of tactics?
So let's take operant conditioning, for example. It's all about rewards and punishments. Think about loyalty programs, discounts, special offers. By rewarding you for buying their product, companies encourage you to do it again in the future. It's almost like training your brain to associate that brand with a positive feeling.
So those buy one, get one free deals, they're not just about being generous, they're about creating a habit.
Exactly. And it works because, we are wired to seek rewards and avoid punishments. So these tactics can be very effective.
This is making me rethink every purchase I've ever made. All right, we've covered how our minds work, how we perceive things, how we learn. But what about specific tactics that marketers use? Our sources mentioned a few that really caught my eye, like this thing called just noticeable difference. What is that all about?
So the just noticeable difference, or J&D, is the smallest change a company can make to a product without you actually noticing. They might, slightly shrink the size or reduce the quantity while keeping the price the same.
Wait, so like that bag of chips, that seems smaller than I remember. That's J&D in action.
It could be. It's a subtle way for companies to cut costs without alarming their customers. And you know what else is incredibly powerful?
What?
The word free.
Well, yeah, who doesn't love free stuff? But, why is that one little word so effective?
Even if it's a buy one, get one free offer, the word free triggers something, deep in our brains. We're wired to love a good deal, and free makes us feel like we're getting something for nothing. Remember when we talked about operant conditioning?
Yeah.
Perfect example.
All starting to connect now. But knowing that it's a psychological trick might make me a little more resistant to those free offers in the future.
Perhaps. That's the power of knowledge, right? Helps us make more informed decisions. Now, get ready for this. Our sources also discuss something called Gestalt psychology.
Okay.
Which sounds very complex, but it's actually really fascinating.
All right, I'm intrigued. What is Gestalt psychology all about?
So it explores how our brains perceive and organize information. It's based on the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So we tend to see patterns and make connections even when information is missing. One of the key principles is closure.
Closure, like closing a door.
Not quite. Closure is our brain's tendency to complete incomplete images. So think about logos with missing pieces. Your brain automatically fills them in, right? That's closure in action. And marketers, they use it to make their brands more memorable.
It's like a little mental puzzle that just keeps the brand in your mind. Okay, so I'm starting to see how this Gestalt psychology stuff works in the real world. Are there any other Gestalt principles that marketers use?
There's figure and ground, which is all about, what stands out, what fades into the background. So next time you're watching TV, pay attention to how commercials use this principle to highlight their products. Is it the bright colors, the strategic placement, the way they make the product pop against the background?
Wow, this is making me rethink every ad I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And you know what else always grabs my attention? Celebrities. They're everywhere in advertising.
Yeah.
And our sources had a lot to say about why celebrity endorsements can be so effective.
Yeah.
It's more than just having a famous face attached to your brand, though, right? There are certain qualities that make a celebrity endorsement really work.
There are.
Give us the inside scoop. What makes a celebrity spokesperson truly persuasive?
Okay, so likability is key. If people like and admire the celebrity, they're more likely to be open to their message. Trustworthiness is also crucial. Do people believe that the celebrity actually uses and likes the product? It's not just about picking the most famous person. It's about finding the right fit for the brand and the target audience.
So it's like, a puzzle. You're finding the perfect pieces to create a complete picture. But I have to ask, does seeing, your favorite celebrity use a product really sway your opinion? Or are you more aware of the marketing tactics now?
That's a great question. Have we become immune? Or are we still influenced? Food for thought.
That's a great point to ponder as we wrap up this part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basics of consumer behavior to some pretty sneaky marketing tactics. But don't worry, we're not done yet. In the next part, we'll be exploring even more ways that companies try to influence our choices. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of consumer behavior. Last time, we were talking about how companies use sneaky tactics like the just noticeable difference, and celebrity endorsements to influence our choices.
Yeah, it's like a constant game of cat and mouse.
Right.
Between marketers and consumers, they're always trying to stay one step ahead.
Exactly. Speaking of staying ahead, our sources went even deeper into how companies manage our perceptions of change, especially when it comes to things like quality and price.
Yeah, that's a tricky area for companies to navigate. They're constantly trying to cut costs and maximize profits, but they don't want to alienate customers in the process.
Right. It's a delicate balancing act. And, our sources highlighted how small changes, like slightly slower internet speeds or using a cheaper ingredient in a food product, might go unnoticed at first.
Right.
But over time, those subtle shifts can add up, impacting both the company's bottom line and the customer's experience.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's not always about making things worse. Sometimes it's about finding that that sweet spot where they can make adjustments without, significantly impacting the perceived value for the customer. It's like they're trying to, sneak things past us without us even realizing it.
And often we're complicit in that. We get comfortable with brands we trust, and we don't always, scrutinize every little detail.
I know I'm guilty of that. I'll grab my usual coffee without even looking at the price.
Right.
Even though it seems like it goes up every few months.
Yeah.
But now that I know about this tactic, I'm going to be more mindful.
That's the key takeaway here. Awareness, right? Once you understand the game, you can start to spot those subtle changes and make more informed choices.
Okay, so we've talked about how companies manage our perceptions of change. I kind of want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, which is learning and memory.
Right.
Yeah.
The fascinating world of how our brains acquire and retain information. Our sources had some really intriguing insights into the different types of learning and how they, apply to marketing.
Okay, I'm ready for a refresher.
Right.
Let's start with classical conditioning. I remember we talked about how companies use it to create, those positive associations.
With their products? Right. Think about those commercials that use, catchy jingles or heartwarming imagery. They're trying to create, a positive emotional connection with their brand.
Yeah, they're weaving a story around the product.
Exactly.
To make it seem more appealing and desirable.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what are the key ingredients for successful classical conditioning?
So the most effective conditioning happens when the unconditioned stimulus, which is the thing that naturally triggers a response, is paired with a neutral stimulus that doesn't initially have any meaning.
Okay, I'm a little lost. Can you give me a real-world example?
Sure. So think about a popular fast food chain.
Okay.
They pair, their burgers and fries, which is the unconditioned stimulus, with catchy jingles and bright colors. Those are the neutral stimuli. Over time, we start to associate those sights and sounds with the craving for a burger and fries.
Wow, so sneaky. It's like they're hijacking our natural responses and associating them with their products.
Precisely. And our brains are wired to make these connections, even if we're not aware it's happening.
Okay, what about operant conditioning? We talked about that earlier too, right? It's all about rewards and punishments.
Exactly. It's about shaping behavior through positive and negative reinforcement. So, companies use this by offering incentives like loyalty programs, discounts, free gifts, to encourage those repeat purchases.
It's like training a dog with treats.
Right.
You reward the desired behavior, and the dog is more likely to repeat it.
Exactly. And it works on humans too. We're motivated by rewards. Think about those buy 10, get 1 free punch cards.
Yeah.
They're designed to keep you coming back for more.
Yeah, it's brilliant. They're creating a habit loop.
They are.
That benefits their bottom line.
Yeah.
But sometimes it feels like companies are playing with our emotions.
Well, emotions play a huge role in consumer behavior, right?
Yeah.
And there's another type of learning that comes into play here, observational learning.
Observational learning, what's that all about?
It's learning by watching others. So think about how, we're constantly bombarded with images of people living their best life, seemingly thanks to certain products and services.
Oh, right, like those perfectly curated Instagram feeds.
Exactly. Where everyone seems to be on a glamorous vacation or wearing the latest fashion trends.
Right, you're right.
We see others enjoying those products, and we subconsciously associate them with those positive experiences. It's a powerful form of marketing that taps into our social nature.
It makes you wonder how much of our, desire for certain things is driven by what we see other people doing.
It's a good question to ask ourselves, isn't it? Are we buying things because we genuinely need or want them? Or are we just trying to keep up with the Joneses?
That's a good point. Okay, so we've talked about classical conditioning, operant conditioning, observational learning.
Right.
What about cognitive learning? Where does that fit into the picture?
So cognitive learning is all about actively processing information and making conscious decisions. It's about, understanding the features and benefits of a product, weighing the pros and cons before making a purchase.
So when you actually do your research, read those reviews, compare prices before buying something.
Exactly. And marketers can influence this process by, providing clear, compelling information about their products.
Right.
They might highlight those unique features, emphasize benefits, address any concerns. but they can also use some sneaky tactics to play on our cognitive biases.
Oh, they can. Like what kind of tactics are we talking about?
So they might use framing effects to influence our perception of value.
Okay.
So, for example, they might present a product as a limited time offer or a, once in a lifetime opportunity to create a sense of urgency.
So it's like they're playing on our, fear of missing out.
Exactly. And they might use anchoring effects to make their prices seem more reasonable. So, they might show you a higher priced option first so that the lower priced option seems like a bargain.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's all about manipulating our perception of value.
Exactly. And they might use the availability heuristic to make their products seem more desirable. So they might, highlight how popular or in demand a product is.
Right.
To create the impression that everyone wants it.
Yeah, like that social proof phenomenon.
Right.
We see other people buying it, so we assume it must be good.
Exactly. And it's a very powerful motivator because, we're social creatures and we tend to follow the crowd.
It's amazing how many different tactics marketers use to influence our thinking and our behavior. It makes you wonder if we ever stand a chance.
It can feel overwhelming, but, knowledge is power, right? The more we understand these tactics, the better equipped we are to make informed decisions.
So it's not about avoiding marketing altogether.
Right.
It's about being aware how it works and, making choices that align with our values and our needs.
Exactly. And speaking of influences, let's shift our focus outward a little bit to the external factors that shape consumer behavior.
Yeah.
Things like culture, social groups, even the physical environment.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just like what's going on inside our heads. The outside world plays a role too.
Absolutely. And these external factors can be just as powerful as our internal psychology.
Okay, I'm ready to explore these outside influences.
Yeah.
Let's start with culture. How does culture shape our consumer behavior?
So think of culture as this giant tapestry of shared values, beliefs, and customs that influences, how we see the world, what we consider desirable. It's kind of the backdrop against which our consumer behavior plays out.
So people from different cultures might have very different ideas about, what's trendy or what's valuable.
Exactly. For example, in some cultures, individual expression and standing out from the crowd is highly valued. In other cultures, conformity and blending in is more important. These differences can have a huge impact on how, marketers approach different consumer groups.
Yeah, this is making me realize how much I take my own cultural influences for granted. It's like a lens that I see the world through without even realizing it.
It's like the air we breathe, right? We're often unaware of it until it's different. And those differences are precisely what make understanding consumer behavior so fascinating.
Okay, so culture is a big one. What about social groups? How do they influence our choices as consumers?
So think about, your closest friends. Your family, your colleagues, the people you spend the most time with. These social groups play a powerful role in shaping our, attitudes and beliefs about pretty much everything, including the products we buy and the brands we choose.
So if all my friends are raving about a certain brand of sneakers, I'm more likely to want those sneakers too.
Exactly. It's that social proof phenomenon we talked about earlier.
Right.
We see others enjoying something. We assume it must be, good, desirable.
Kind of like that FOMO feeling, but applied to shopping.
Exactly. And marketers, they're keenly aware of this. So they use, social media influencers, peer-to-peer marketing, word-of-mouth campaigns to tap into that power of social influence because they know that a recommendation from a trusted friend is far more persuasive than any fancy ad campaign.
Yeah, it's all about creating that sense of community and belonging.
Yeah.
And then using it to market their products.
Exactly. And speaking of community, have you ever noticed how, the physical environment of a store can influence your shopping experience?
Oh, absolutely. Walking into a bright, welcoming store with upbeat music, just puts me in a better mood.
Right.
Than a dark, cluttered store with harsh lighting.
Exactly. Retailers are very strategic about creating a specific atmosphere that encourages you to, browse, linger, and ultimately buy more. They use these sensory marketing techniques that appeal to all of our senses.
So it's not just about, the products they're selling, it's about the whole experience.
Exactly. Think about the smell of like freshly baked bread wafting through a grocery store, or the calming music playing in a spa. These are all carefully crafted elements designed to influence our mood and behavior.
It's a little bit manipulative, isn't it?
It can be, but like with all of these tactics, awareness is key.
Right.
Once you understand how your senses are being stimulated, you can make, more conscious decisions about whether to give in to those impulses or resist them.
Okay, we've talked about culture, social groups, the physical environment. Are there any other, external factors that play a role in how we behave as consumers?
Oh, there are many more. Our economic situation, for example. If you're feeling financially secure, you're more likely to, splurge on a treat than if you're, struggling to make ends meet.
That makes sense. And I imagine, our life stage.
Absolutely. A single college student is going to have very different spending habits than like a married couple with a mortgage and kids to support.
Right.
Right. And then there's our personal values, right?
Yeah.
Some people, they try to support brands that align with their beliefs about, sustainability and ethical practices, even if it means spending a bit more.
For sure.
Right. And then finally, let's not forget about the impact of technology. The internet, social media, they've revolutionized the way we shop and consume information.
That's a huge one.
Yeah.
It's like the whole world of shopping is like at our fingertips now.
Exactly.
Oh.
We can buy almost anything online with a few clicks. And we're constantly exposed to, targeted advertising based on our browsing history and our social media activity.
Yeah, it's both exciting and a little bit overwhelming, to be honest.
It certainly can be. But again, knowledge is power. The more we understand how these forces are shaping our behavior, the more control we have over our own choices.
Okay, so we've explored a whole range of internal and external factors that influence consumer behavior. It's a pretty complex landscape.
It really is, but it's also incredibly fascinating, don't you think?
I have to agree. Now, I'm curious, what stood out to you the most in our deep dive so far? What surprised you or made you think differently about your own choices?
That's a great question, and it's a great question for our listeners to ponder as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What are you going to do differently now that you know all of this?
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, but we're not done yet. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll wrap up our exploration of consumer behavior with some final insights and takeaways. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into consumer behavior. We've uncovered a lot of ground, from the psychology of perception to those subtle ways companies try to manage our perceptions of change.
Yeah, it's like we've peeled back the layers of an onion, revealing all those intricate mechanisms.
Exactly. And speaking of onions, remember those sneaky tactics companies use, like slightly shrinking a product size while keeping the price the same?
Yes. The infamous just noticeable difference, or J&D.
Right.
A classic example of how companies can make those subtle adjustments without, triggering any alarm bells for consumers.
Well, our sources went even deeper. They pointed out how these small tweaks can actually have a big impact on a company's profitability. It's all about maximizing those margins without, sacrificing customer satisfaction.
It's a delicate dance for sure, finding that sweet spot where they can cut costs or adjust ingredients without, significantly impacting the perceived value for the customer.
And sometimes it's not even about making things smaller or cheaper. It's about how they frame those changes. Remember how powerful the word free can be?
Oh, absolutely. That little word can trigger a rush of excitement and make us feel like we're getting a fantastic deal, even if we're spending more than we intended.
Our sources pointed out that this ties back to our innate desire for rewards, that feeling of getting something for nothing. It's like a built-in psychological loophole that marketers can exploit.
And we often fall for it without even realizing it. But now that we know about this tactic, perhaps we can be a bit more skeptical of those free offers.
Right. Knowledge is power. And speaking of powerful influences, I want to touch on something we haven't really talked about yet. The role of design and aesthetics in, shaping our perceptions.
Yeah. The power of color, font, imagery. All those visual elements that contribute to a brand's identity and how we experience a product.
Our sources went into detail about how those elements can influence how we interpret information. and make choices. For example, like a bold, eye-catching font can make a message seem more urgent or important, while like a softer, more elegant font might convey like sophistication or luxury.
It's amazing how subtle design choices can have such a significant impact on our perceptions.
And it's not just about the message itself, right?
Right.
It's about who is sending it. The sender's credibility.
Yeah.
Perceived expertise can make a big difference in how we receive and interpret information.
Oh, that's so true. We're more likely to trust information from a source that we perceive as, knowledgeable and authoritative. Think about how much more persuasive a product review is if it comes from, like, a trusted expert or a friend whose opinion you value.
It's like they're lending their credibility to the product or message. And, remember how we talked about the importance of congruence in celebrity endorsements? That same principle applies here. The message and the messenger need to align for it to be truly effective.
Exactly. It's all about building trust and establishing a sense of authenticity. But let's not forget about the receiver of the message. Us, the consumers, our own, individual characteristics play a huge role in how we process information.
Yeah.
And make choices.
That's where things get really interesting, because no two consumers are exactly alike, right? Our personalities, our values, our past experiences, all of those things contribute to our unique perspective.
And our current state of mind. Are we happy, stressed, tired, hungry? All those factors can influence our susceptibility to marketing messages and our willingness to make a purchase.
It's like a giant puzzle with so many pieces, interacting and influencing each other. But I think that's what makes the study of consumer behavior so compelling. It's a constant exploration of, the human psyche and how we interact with the world around us.
It's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to marketing.
Right.
Or understanding consumer behavior. What works for one person, might not work for another.
That's why it's so important for marketers to go beyond those surface-level assumptions and really delve into, like, the nuances of human psychology and behavior.
And it's equally important for us as consumers to be aware of those nuances and understand how our own minds work. The more we know about ourselves and the tactics that marketers use, the more empowered we are to make choices that align with, our true needs and values.
That's a great point to emphasize as we wrap up this deep dive. It's not about becoming cynical or distrusting of all marketing. It's about becoming more conscious and intentional in our interactions with the world of consumption.
Yeah, it's about taking back control and making choices that serve us, rather than being, passively influenced by forces we don't understand.
We've explored a wide range of concepts, from the basic psychology of perception and learning to the subtle ways companies, manage our perceptions.
Yeah.
And the broader influences that shape our behavior.
It's been a fascinating journey. Now, we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. What are your biggest takeaways from this deep dive? What surprised you? What are you going to do differently? Share your thoughts, and, let's keep this conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of consumer behavior. Until next time, remember, knowledge is power, and a mindful consumer is a powerful consumer.